Hello, everyone. On behalf of Just Being Center, welcoming you all to our webinar on Presence Oriented Psychotherapy in Attachment and Relational Trauma. The webinar will entail a conversation between our speakers, Sandy Andrade and Arpita Bohra. We'll also have some time for Q&A towards the end. Requesting all participants to keep themselves on mute. And in case if any queries come in, you can send in a message to me at Just Being Center. We also have our team member Gayatri, and you can just drop in a message. Our speakers for today, Sandy Andrade and Arpita Bohra, are here. And Sandy Andrade is a mindfulness and presence-oriented psychotherapist, specializing in trauma and attachment resolution, an internationally accredited MBCT teacher, developer of the Presence-Oriented Psychotherapy, and founder-director of Just Being Center for Mindfulness and Presence. With 23 years in mental health, she is passionate about integrating contemporary psychology with wisdom traditions. Welcome, Sandy. The conversation is between Sandy and Arpita. We have Arpita also here with us. Arpita is a depth psychotherapist and has trained in and drawn upon different frameworks, primarily blending psychodynamic and attachment theory with a trauma-informed, embodied presence-oriented and person-centered approach. She believes in creating a space to listen to the body as well as the mind in therapy. Welcome, Arpita. And over to you both.
Thank you, Shibi. Yeah, and great to see some people who have joined in, some familiar faces and some new. So welcome to this conversation. And, you know, as we offer this, as we teach this presence-oriented psychotherapy course, there are many elements in the course, in the approach, where we kind of like include attachment work, there's the relational work, there's the presence of the therapist, and of course all of this is based on mindfulness and really coming from the Buddhist psychology lens. And we also integrate the body mind, so looking at the somatic aspects, bringing in some elements of IFS and focusing, and also seeing it from, at an energetic level, how can we really support our clients and the therapeutic work. And but all in all, the presence-oriented therapeutic approach is really where the base is the presence of the therapist, and all of the work is oriented from presence. So we'll unpack that a bit in terms of, in terms of even what is presence and what is it that we mean by presence-oriented therapy. How do these aspects of attachment and relational work really fit into that? And also how is it, just looking at it from a psychodynamic point of view, what are the important concepts and which are really critical to, I think, all therapeutic work. And it's nice to have this conversation with Arpita. Arpita has also done the presence-oriented course. And so, we keep having these conversations, and there are many other students as well coming from different orientations, specializing in different ways. And it's nice to have these conversations. So we thought we'll take this conversation in where it can probably benefit more people, because maybe the applications are really relevant to all of therapy, I would assume. So I'm wondering, Arpita, if you want to say a little bit more about your work and your approach, and then we can talk about, we can unpack, what is presence, what is attachment, and look at those pieces a little bit more.
Sure, thank you. Lovely to be having this conversation. And I'm excited about, all the questions. I have a lot of questions, so it's good that we're going to have space to discuss all of this. So about me, I started kind of in a very psychoanalytic, psychodynamic framework. That's where my experience of therapy began. That's where my learning of therapy began. And I think for the first 5 years, I was quite religious about being very, psychodynamic and psychoanalytically inclined. I also started working at a university during that time, setting up the counseling center. And I realized that you can't do long-term psychoanalysis with students who are coming in with crisis, with a lot of dysregulation. Of course, I mean, one can, but the center was not equipped given the volume of students and the concerns that were being presented. So I think I really had to pivot. There was a time professionally I had to pivot, and that was the year that I decided to pause the psychoanalytic training program that I was in, and I shifted to presence-oriented work because I've heard a lot of good things about it, and I wanted to work more with the body. I think that's been very foundational for me. I think there are many concepts that psychodynamic work has, which are aligned with many other therapeutic approaches. What the presence approach has brought in is not just a way to look at the relationship with me and my client, but also to help the client forge a more resourced relationship with their own inner material, with their inner conflicts. And I think I try to bring that element into my work as much as possible. So that's one of the, tip of the iceberg. We'll talk more as we go. But yeah.
Yeah, I thought before we go, looking at many of these aspects, maybe for the audience, so that we are on the same page, maybe we can just look at just understanding what is transference, countertransference, maybe object relations, or any other key concepts from psychodynamic work which might be relevant to the therapeutic space in general. So I'm wondering whether you
Sure.
kind of just define that a little bit, or we can explain that a little bit.
Yeah. And I think it's really good to have this conversation about integration, because for the longest time, I didn't know what to call myself. So it's great to talk about these things in terms of what are the things that kind of are applicable across, I guess, most good therapy practices. A couple of core psychodynamic principles or elements would be, of course, the relationality of it. I think a lot of therapists in my generation particularly are looking at it more in terms of the relational space that gets formed. And essentially, even when we go back to Freudian times, there was a lot of focus on the fact that the client is coming in essentially, and they're beginning a relationship with you. And in that relationship, things are going to come up. The client is going to project possibly fantasies or associations that come from a prior time in their life onto the therapist. That is what we kind of call transference. So for example, if I've been in a childhood where I really wanted someone to come and rescue me, and I didn't have a lot of self-resourcing, I didn't have someone to look out for me, when I end up going to therapy, it's possible that either I will really want my therapist to rescue me. I want them to tell me exactly what to do. I want them to give me the answers. I might get very angry and disappointed when they don't play that role. Or I might go into therapy and become very self-sufficient. So I'm going to kind of replay that same self-containment. I don't really need you. I've got this. You can talk about, what you want to talk about. But, it's me on my own at the end of the day. I won't be able to take in the relationship. So I think this is why I really like psychodynamic and relational work. Because no matter what, at the end of the day, you are in a relationship with your client, things are going to come in. So that's the transference. The countertransference is whatever I may feel in response to my client, in response to the transference they come that they come in with. So for example, when they treat me as a rescuer, do I feel this big urge to rescue them? And do I start doing a lot of things? Like, do I start sending them links between sessions and trying to give them an extra 10 minutes and, helping them really think through things and giving them a lot of advice? Or do I start getting irritated that they want me to be the rescuer? And all of these feelings can be looked at, because maybe this is something that psychodynamic therapy and theory looks at, is that what's happening in the room, in the relationship, is also playing out outside the room. So maybe the client wants to be close to people in their life, but what's actually happening in the relationship is that they're feeling resentful and angry because they are expected to rescue the client a lot, just like what the therapist is in touch with. Or maybe the client is feeling, playing this very helpless role, and people are just coming, and she has a lot of people in her life, but it's not an adult to adult relationship. She's more like the child and they're like the adult. So then again, you're not individuating fully. That's a bit about countertransference and transference, and like a rough example of how we might look at whatever is happening in the relationship and use it as a clue and a mirror to what is happening outside the room in the client's relationships. That is just a bit of like the tip of the iceberg. I think the other thing that we look at in terms of the object relations is that this very core idea, which I think presence-oriented work also has, attachment work has, is that your early attachments really shape your personality development, and the relationships that you were kind of born into and grew up with will affect how you relate to people in your adult life. So that's the other thing which will come up. So in psychodynamic therapy, we try and make those connections between how you may have felt and been treated and related with growing up, and how maybe some maladaptive patterns in that are now causing a lot of dysfunction or distance in your relationships. So for example, if you had to be very self-contained and not need anybody to help you, and then you're in a romantic relationship or a close friendship and you need help, but you can't ask for it, or your friends want to help you, but you put up a wall and then you feel distant. Those are some of those very nitty-gritty relational dynamics that part of the object relations framework helps us look at. The other thing which I think, again, we have in common a little with presence-oriented work is exploring affect, which just means that whatever emotions are there, we want to talk about the emotions, not just the story. We want to look at the underlying themes that keep coming up emotionally. And we want to be able to provide space for clients to feel these emotions and understand also where they come from. And I think the other thing we also look at, which I don't think presence-oriented work does as much, we can talk about how you do it, is in the course of relational work especially, we expect that there's going to be some resistance that will manifest in the relationship. This could be a series of missed appointments after that one session where we really, struck gold and got into something very deep. This could be coming, 10 minutes late to the session all the time, or missing payments, or more to do with the frame of the relationship in one part, but also resistance towards maybe taking in some of the insight or the content of the session per se. Like there's some block basically that may come up. So we do a lot of exploration around what is it that is kind of getting in the way of the client, maybe truly collaborating in therapy, truly relating to the therapist, truly taking in the process. So I guess those are some of the core elements. I'm sure I've left some out. But
yeah, and we can kind of like talk about that as we go along. And I'd like to talk a bit about how we see the resistance from a presence-oriented framework a little later. But I think so. I'll just explain, maybe what is presence-oriented psychotherapy. And really, the 2 years of training and in this is really a training in the perception of the therapist, right? What do you perceive? How do you perceive? And from where do you perceive it? And all of this is in, towards also supporting the client to come into presence. And of course, the relational field then has to be one in which it feels safe and it feels welcoming. And also we look at the whole relational field, which is much more than just between therapist and client. So, and a lot of this training is then more towards developing this capacity within the therapist, right? So there's one thing about knowledge, and there's also the skills, and then there is this inner capacity as to who you are when you show up in that moment with a client who's telling you something or who's experiencing something. And that whole how you're relating to what is coming up for the client in the moment and how you are meeting that. It's like really, I I think, really the core of this therapeutic relationship. Now, how does a therapist come into this kind of capacity to be able to actually meet the client exactly where they are in what they are experiencing? And one of the key elements of that is for the therapist as a person and as a therapist of how do you meet yourself? How do you meet the things that are coming up within you? And what is that inner relationship that gets established, right? So, so there is a lot of emphasis on the therapist's own work, right? Their own. This is the capacity building of really being with oneself, comfortable in one's own skin, meeting one's own relational patterns, because those too will show up in the relational space with a client or with different clients in different ways, right? And the base of this, which is presence, right? And presence as the state of being that we all have access to, where it's an unconditioned space. It's not, it's not, it does not have the flavors of our conditioning, the flavors of all our experiences, right? And so from that space, we meet our, our conditioning, our experiences, which very much include what we have encountered relationally, right? Because that's how the self is formed. Our psychological self is formed through our relating, like you mentioned, object relations, or, and if you just take it very simply, like you said, all our early experiences with our primary caregivers, of how it kind of influences and really sets these inner templates of how we relate to self, other, and the world, right? And actually, all of this, the relationality of it, it's there all the time, because our world is filled and our lives are filled with relationships, right? So we encounter this all of the time. Now, maybe one difference is that maybe in a psychodynamic approach, there is a certain insight and a certain knowing that, okay, there is this pattern that exists for me. Whereas in a presence-oriented approach, where there is the use and practice of mindfulness, where we're really learning to come in touch with the body and include the body in what we are encountering in our inner experience, right? So it includes the body mind. And so triggers become extremely important as doorways and pathways to really be able to look at this not from a point of view of fixing it or resolving it or making it go away, but simply to give it space to be able to meet it. And in that meeting, in a true meeting, there is the transformation that happens, right? Something moves, something shifts, and the way it is stored in our body mind, even the neural pathways, that also starts to shift. So this inclusion of the body because of the practice of mindfulness, because of somatic practices, that becomes a very critical link. So now let's look at in the therapeutic relationship, like we were talking about transference, countertransference, when it shows up in the relational field. And the first thing is where the therapist is present. So you're present in the body, you're also present to the client, and you're also present to this relational field, right? But your body is giving you, and it's a very, very reliable collaborator. Your body is giving you the cues. Like suddenly, maybe you may notice like pulling back or some reaction, but you'll also notice maybe some contraction in the body, some uneasiness in the body, something that lets you know that, okay, something here is triggering me. Now, when one sees that and can just simply acknowledge that in that moment and have a way of being with this place, being with this path as we are attentive to the client, right? That itself, something is kind of shifting in how I am relating to what is going on for me in that relational space. And now I can come not from a triggered place, not from a reactive place, but I can come in more fully from my presence, from being, right? And just offering that space to the client. So that really kind of makes this relational space also feel safe. In this context, maybe I'll say a little bit about how we see, resistance. And so because of the view that everything is, whatever arises is okay, everything that arises is welcome, everything that arises is actually the doorway into our true being and true nature. Because of this view, then when a client is showing, some form, there is that kind of push and pull that is happening, then that is welcome too. The only thing we might not do is to kind of directly kind of confront it, but invite the client to see what is it that is coming up for them, right? So what came up for you? What's coming up for you? And can we stay with that a bit? And as we stay with that in the body, something reveals itself, right? Maybe through an image, maybe through an implicit memory, maybe of, like you're saying, how far back does this go, right? And very often that gets pulled up, right, because it feels safe. So the therapist is not pulling it up, right? Neither is the client, but it's emerging because of the safety of the field. And it's like that part within the client that has not been heard, seen, understood, felt, not had its needs met, that part feels safe to show up. And when that part shows up, first through the way the therapist is with the client, that creates the sense of safety for this part. It feels that sense of welcoming, no labeling, not a bad part, and not resistant, but just we see it as a protective part, like a guard who has been there trying to protect the whole system from maybe a flooding of emotions or something that was too much at some point of time before this. And so really coming into a relationship with even this place from a place of sensitivity and curiosity and really getting to know it. And as this starts to happen, the client also, and that's also facilitated in some way, where the client develops this inner relationship with these places within them. So, in some way, then there is that inner relating that starts to happen within the client system. And in some way, then presence oriented therapy is about coming back to oneself, coming home to oneself. And whether that part shows up later, whether it comes up in a variety of ways in other relationships as well, the client is able to kind of hold it and come into this relating. And over a period of time, the way it is held, even in the body, starts to loosen up. Right? So it's not all at once, but it's bit by bit this shift in this relationship. Yeah. So, yeah, I think I probably said a lot more around this. And I'm just wondering how, what's your experience with this and what comes up maybe as maybe a question or an inquiry that we can look at together.
Yeah, I think there are two things that I'm sitting with, not just a question, but listening to you. I think this is one of the things I really like about presence work. I feel it's just so inherently trauma informed because the first thing we focus on is safety. And I don't think that gets enough airspace sometimes when it comes to other approaches, because sometimes even with the psychodynamic work, like in my training, how I experienced is it was almost like we have to think about what's happening, spend a lot of time thinking about what's happening in the room, of course, being with the client. But we don't talk about safety in this way. We do talk about unconditional acceptance of the client. But when there's resistance, it's like, okay, now you're time to almost get into action, think about this. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to confront it? Are we going to hold it? And that is, in some ways, it's it's more of an intellectual response to what's happening in the room. So I think I love the fact that I have trained in presence work, because this is my reminder to really slow it down, to stay with safety before we get into any kind of insight. And I think that in itself, right, what I'm listening to you say is that your own reactions to what the client is bringing into in the relationship shape the relational field, so they can have a embodied live experience of being safe, even with things that are traditionally kind of named as resistance. And I think that's been my own journey around like learning to reframe resistance, to see it as something that is coming more from a protective system and to engage with it, from a place more that comes from presence and safety. I think I have some questions around, if you could talk a little bit more, for example, around how do we explore something like a protective part that's getting in the way? What are the questions you would ask a client? Like, for example, if there is a client who maybe comes 20 minutes after the session starts and there's like a tentativeness towards coming into therapy, and it's not you're a little bit maybe into the work right now, you're touching into something, and then these behaviors might show up, maybe skipping sessions, missing sessions, or some clients might come in, they might want to talk about something completely different than what they may have said they were struggling with, for example. So I'm just curious about, how do you engage in dialogue perhaps with these protective parts? If you could speak to that a little bit. What can we take away from today? Having a conversation.
Yeah. So one is at the behavioral level, right? You're seeing somebody maybe come in late, like you said, miss appointments. Now, obviously, those are also their attachment patterns, like you also earlier pointed out to, like maybe I have an avoidant pattern, or a very anxious pattern, like I want to come in early. I know, and sometimes it's very informative when the client feels okay about sharing what makes them late or what makes them come early, or how it is when they are waiting in the other room and your previous appointment has spilled over a bit. And one client I remember said to me, and that was quite insightful, of how as therapists also we need to maintain the boundaries, because it is so critical to how the client perceives the relational field. And this client who was waiting, she didn't say it in an accusatory way or anything, but it just felt okay for her to say that, when I just said, oh, I'm sorry, we kind of like spilled over and you had to wait. And she said, yes. And I had these thoughts that, am I not important enough, for you to, right?
Yeah.
Because there was already safety and trust that was established. And so then that became, because that's what she was sitting with, that is what she was present to. And that was invited into the space of really sensing and attuning to this feeling of not feeling important enough to the other. It's got nothing to do with what happened between, in this, but it becomes, and that's what we mean, it becomes a doorway into really sitting with this response that has come up and really holding space for this part that feels that way, which is linked to a lot of other early experiences with, in the early relational field. So, and those things then kind of like spontaneously comes up. So it's not like as the therapist, you're going after it, right? But you're allowing it for it to emerge in its own time, at its own pace. And so when a client comes late, for example, or there is a pattern of that, it might not be necessary to kind of, point that out and make it into something. Maybe we talk about it, see what comes up for them. But most importantly, it is also their inner dynamic of trying to find the right distance with with you in this new emerging space. And it may feel safe, and then they take a few steps back and then a few steps forward. And so you allow for that to happen, just like you would, like maybe, you know, to a child who's maybe hiding and wants to make contact but is still hiding, and you would give the child some time to feel okay and safe about coming into contact, and not, saying, why are you not making contact, right? So in a similar way, it's almost that there are these early places within us that operate in the relational field, and it's almost like they're checking, is that okay, and is that response fine? And so from a presence oriented point of view, it's really okay however you are. And if you kind of like take your time to come into that adjustment of how and when it feels safe. Because we are also looking at therapy as, or therapeutic process, as a small part in the client's life. There is much more that is going on, and all of life itself that also works, together with what you are with the client, or what the client is saying that they want to be with. So, so whatever comes up for the client, wherever they are at, we just meet that. And the timing of when it feels safe to bring up what is really, dependent on the client's internal system. So we trust the inner wisdom and the inherent wisdom, within the client, to kind of determine that, right? So the pacing of therapy, the pacing of what we will work with, how we will work with, is really determined from this very active dynamic that is happening moment to moment with the client.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the funny thing, what's coming to me is that there's like an absence of aggression. That is an absence of aggression almost that's coming in with how we are looking at the relationship, because I feel sometimes there can be a little bit of almost an aggression with which we're trying to look at these patterns or work with these patterns or confront these patterns. The other thing that came up when you were talking is how much compassion matters when we are doing presence-oriented work. And I would say all therapeutic work. But I don't think, apart from the mindfulness-based approaches, or approaches that ally with Buddhist psychotherapy, nobody really talks about compassion, and not just as a concept intellectually, but as a state of being that we are actively trying to cultivate in order to do this work. I had 2 questions around it. If you'd like to maybe talk a little bit more about how we look at compassion from a presence-oriented perspective and where it is in the larger scheme of things, but also when we are holding compassion like this, how are we looking at our work with clients who are maybe very self-critical, who may be mimicking, early patterns where they are internally very self-critical with themselves, and keeping compassion in mind. What does your work maybe with clients like these look like?
Yeah, so compassion is a very integral part in any mindfulness-based approach, and the presence-oriented approach does have a mindfulness base. It does come from a more Buddhist psychology lens, and we are really looking at it as a non-dual path. So, but compassion again, it's for the therapist, right, to come into compassion. So compassion itself is a very natural state of being. Again, presence, compassion, wisdom, these are not like I have to work very hard to reach there. I do need practice so that I can move from, just the initial movements of the thinking mind to deeper layers of the mind and deeper layers of being. So I do need to practice for that. But it's not like I need to practice and then only I will reach there. We naturally come into this sense of compassion and open-heartedness. The heart opens out. When we are completely present, when we are attuned to the other and to ourselves, and really very deeply listening, right? And you mentioned one very important part of listening to feelings, and we are with the feelings of the other or the feeling sensation in the body, right? And as we are with that in this way, then there is a natural flow of compassion that happens. And again, compassion not as Sandy is compassionate. There's just compassion, right? There's just kindness, maybe, or a softening, right? A tenderness. So all of that starts to kind of naturally, we come into those natural states of our being. And the client receives that, because at a physiological level, we are always in resonance. We are always in this right hemisphere to right hemisphere kind of contact. So the client is receiving it and their physiology is also responding to it. So through the therapist's presence, the client in resonance is also coming into that state of being, and they are tapping into this natural state of being, which they don't need to fix so many things and then come into it, right? It's there, it's available, and it becomes available to them in that space. And that's how their inner relating also starts to shift, right? And that's what we want. We want the inner relating of the client, where they can be there for themselves in a different way and relate to whatever they encounter differently, right? Um, so, so that's regarding, compassion. And the second part of our self-critical voice, or this harsh voice, I think even as therapists, we have that, right? There's always a commentator. There's always like some little voice going on in the background, maybe self-critical, even in the therapeutic space. Oh, you're not doing it right. Do you know what you're doing? How can you be this way? And there might be so much of that self-criticism and self-judgment coming up even for the therapist, which really sometimes gets in the way, right? And so the therapist also learns to meet those places. And one very important part is the befriending of these places. So, even mindfulness practice has the element of compassion, has the element of inner relating, because without that meeting, without that meeting from the heart, a true shift doesn't quite happen. So when we are meeting like a feeling sensation even in the body, and we come in with kindness, we come in like maybe through just self-touch, right? Not just as oh, let's regulate the physiology kind of thing. Yes, there is the regulation of the physiology that's also happening with that. But there is also the warmth of your hand. There is that that inner relating, that of really coming into this with a sense of gentle holding and allowing and acceptance, not just as concepts, but as a felt sense of that. Right? And for that felt sense to develop, then these self-critical parts actually are sometimes just protectors. They're protecting the system. So then the first thing to do is really turn towards the self-critical place. And really come in with this interest. What is this voice? What is this belief? What is this feeling sensation that comes up with that? What's it attempting to do? Right? And that's something that you would hold not as an analysis, but really in terms of coming into the feeling sensation in the body and being with it in that way. And really holding this question, what is it attempting? Really trying to understand it, like understand almost like its point of view. Right? What's it doing? Why is it doing it? What made it be there in the first place? And that understanding itself, the true understanding of that, it's like something relents, right? And something softens. And then you have more access to the more vulnerable places, the more younger places maybe within us.
Yeah.
So
again,
yeah, go ahead.
I think, even as I'm listening to you, I was actually thinking of some of my clients who really struggle with self-compassion. And they struggle with receiving any kind of compassion that I may offer. They struggle to also be, too embodied. So there's sometimes this block or this wall that comes up with anything that is too soft. And when you talked about this thing about just trying to understand what is coming up, I think something else I'd like to add, which I have learned and I keep reminding myself from presence oriented work, I have realized it makes a big difference if I'm sitting with a client and trying to get them to be more compassionate and trying to break through that wall and trying to figure this out with them. Usually I'm going to end up, not going very far. But when I see you work and when I have experienced, our processes in presence-oriented work, I think a very core component of that is really dropping the agenda so that we can just understand what's going on. And it's a very subtle shift, but it feels like a very big shift, because even now when you were talking, I was like, yes, this is really lovely. But I was actually just holding some of my clients who really struggle with being self-critical. And it struck me that, yes, I sometimes do sit with a really big agenda of, okay, today we have to, make you see how self-critical you are. We have to, work with this thing that gets in the way of compassion. And instead of working with, I think what struck me from what you were saying is with how much space are we just trying to understand? How much spaciousness are we trying to understand whatever it is that's there? And I think there's some clients and maybe some, blocks in the nervous system also that sometimes come in the way of of being able to connect to presence. Sometimes those blocks are also I'm not sure block is the right word, but there can be a difficulty, even, for example, putting your hand on your chest. Anything to do with the body, anything to do with connecting to yourself, connecting to your physiology, that can become difficult. So when we sit with the client without an agenda, and we invite them to maybe place a palm on their chest or to just make contact maybe with the body, and they cannot. How do you kind of go about it? And also, how do you look at embodiment in the context of presence-oriented work?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think thank you for also highlighting such an important aspect of not having an agenda. And the unfolding that starts to happen when we don't try to do things, and this real shift from doing to being, and really operating from that space. So from that space, when a client, let's say in this example, we're inviting, to just this touch, and there's maybe a lot that may come up with that, or even maybe some kind of contraction in the body. Now we just meet the client where they are. Just this something in them that finds it difficult to offer the sense of compassion to themselves, or to come in with kindness to themselves. And that's okay. Right? Now, in relational work, and something that I draw also from my trainings and many other modalities, in relational work, if that's not a possibility where I can directly come in touch with it, like, for example, being in the body, not so simple, right? For clients where there's a lot going on or that is shut down. And it's not so simple to just say that, or what's happening in the body. That's not really available. It's a growing capacity for the client. So when there is this with compassion that I can't touch into this inner compassion, not yet, right? I may need a bridge, right? And that bridge, one, of course, there's the relational space, which that also might not be, something that I can take in at this point of time. In fact, it brings up a lot more because this is kindness that I've never experienced before, which seems alien. But the bridge here is to stay with the client and maybe invite a secure attachment, figure, or even a space. Because very often with clients, especially where they have this difficulty, is that when you ask them, can you think of a person who, with whom you feel safe, who can offer this sense of compassion, who you would really kind of like, it would be okay to kind of be with. And they said, no one comes to mind. Right? Because the experience in the relational space is not there as much, or because of the traumatic experiences is not accessible, right? And so that's okay too. So you see, with everything, it's okay. Right? So, but this thing of coming into this invitation into kindness and opening the door towards that. So, if that's not available, then maybe some space that feels okay, right? Some memory that they have, right, of that. And then when you have something akin to that, not that the client thinks about it. As a client, you just ask and you see what comes up for the client. What is the also response in the body with it? And then you invite this place in, and allow the client to just remember that or even imagine that, right? And we know that if even in this remembering and this imagination, when you bring it in the here and now, and that's another critical element of presence-oriented work, we bring everything in the here and now, right?
Yeah.
What is present and available in a very direct way. And when that's becoming available in the here and now, then there is this inner feeling also that arises of being able to remember that sense of compassion or that sense of safety and a felt sense of it in the body. And then approaching, whatever is this place that showed up, of approaching it from this place of kindness, right? So that's how we could kind of like bring that in. And the bridge there is the secure attachment, right? We also hold the notion that presence is like the ultimate secure attachment, right? But it's also important to have that experience of how it is, or in a relational way, you know. So we are meeting the client wherever they are and just using that as the ground to allow the body mind to kind of maybe open up a little more. And then that process informs us as to what is the next step. Now, do I need to orient more in the body, give it time to assimilate, to come into more of a sense of embodiment? Because without that, then these processes are incomplete. So yeah, so that's the integration piece of any even small work that is done, of this kind of inner relating, reframing, and step by step, in very small doses, in a very small way, letting it unfold, letting it settle in the body, integrating it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of pausing with,
Yes.
a lot of accompanying,
Yes.
a lot of, I guess, very gentle relating with the experience of the client, with whatever parts that are coming. And again, when we meet these parts, we don't come in with an agenda to make them go away or make them feel better immediately or to fix them. I think what you're saying is that in the process of trying to understand maybe some difficult or painful parts, there is a unknotting, or there is a softening that happens just as we sit with them, with this kind of attention, with this kind of safety, with this kind of non-agenda, attitude almost. And that is I think that is the part of presence work that is also the most difficult to really describe or put into words. It's also difficult to, I don't know how you teach it, but it's not something that's very intellectual, I guess. Not a concept really.
Yeah, it's not, and like even in the course and the teaching and in the modules, it's really then it has to be experiential, right?
Yeah.
Because I may know all of these things, but finding a way to come into it in a felt sense, in an attuned way, moment to moment, to have that attention. I think people who move through the course, I mean, like really, they've really kind of like put in so much in terms of really creating this capacity within themselves. Um, and that shifts a lot also then, the fringe benefit of then the benefit also for oneself, and how that shifts things in one's own relationships and in one's own patterns, right?
Yeah.
And more there is an ease of being, right?
Yeah.
So it's not about the fixing of all of this, but really allowing it to, first of all, allowing it to be. That is the, and then allowing it to unfold, and supporting and, supporting it in that way. So there is the somatic component where relational trauma is concerned. There is the somatic component of how these patterns kind of show up in the body and what happens. So really that bodily sense is very important. And when something opens up, there is also then at the energetic level, we can also kind of support it, right? And again, it's in terms of just being oriented in oneself and in the relational field. And I think what my biggest kind of, and it's an ongoing learning even for me, that's the beauty of presence work, that there is a constant unfolding and gathering, that more and more one comes in touch with that you're not the doer of this. You're not the one who's going to create these big transformations for the client. In some way, you're just this, like the midwife to life's processes. And to come into alignment with that. And so both the therapist and the client are then held in a larger field. It's not therapists holding the client or client holding themselves. It's both resting, like you use the word of spaciousness, in a very spacious, allowing kind of like field. Yeah. So it is held, and that sensing that we are held is also very freeing for the therapist. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think this is something about presence work that I connect with. It's not something that's traditionally talked about, but the idea that there's a flow sometimes to how things unfold in the room. And sometimes it's our pushing and it's, our laboring around it that gets in the way of things coming through. I have maybe one last question because I know the audience also would like to ask questions. But one of the things I kind of wanted us to talk about was, what does it mean to process trauma or attachment trauma from a presence-oriented perspective? What does that look like? And we have, I think, spoken about some of the big pieces today in terms of how we relate to clients and their protective parts. But maybe would you like to share something maybe from your work with clients, particularly also looking at, like you said, there are some imprints in the body or some implicit memories that come up. And so including all of that, what does it look like to use presence-oriented work or to bring presence-oriented work into, relational trauma processing and working through clients?
Yeah. So maybe the first thing is that just like that trigger or what shows up for the client from their everyday life, something happens in their situation, in their relational space, and just acknowledging that and being with that in the body will take us to also places where where it kind of like originated from.
Mm.
Then there is a lot of the repatterning of those inner relationships that we can really kind of support in a moment-to-moment way as it is kind of like coming up, as it is kind of showing up. And then the integration piece of it landing back in the body, right? Whatever has been kind of like worked with or worked through. So, yeah, and it can show up in many, many different ways, the way it presents itself and what comes up, and also the pacing of it, right? So, for someone with, like, for example, with disorganized attachment pattern, where there is a lot of relational trauma, we're talking about even borderline personality, which is nothing but a lot of relational developmental trauma. It's really working small steps, small ways in terms of these early experiences, maybe you're feeling abandoned, and then having, in that felt sense way of having a secure attachment, or the presence of a secure attachment, to really kind of build that in, but also to reduce um, the amount of threat that is experienced in the system. Just, having another, because when there is a lot of relational trauma, even the figure that was supposed to provide safety, like our primary caregivers, is also the source, in very often turns out to be the source of threat. So, really there is both like an approach towards safety, like something really longing for that, and then there is also the pulling back, and that really coming into this threat response of fight, flight, freeze that happens in the body, that I cannot kind of come into that. So it really needs to be very delicately held, because, like we started off with, the baseline is safety. And and not just, it's safe for you to be with anything, but a felt sense of safety. Like every single part of you needs to feel the sense of safety. And so you're not moving more than that. Right? So that's the way we would kind of like approach when there is relational trauma, but at the client's pace. Right. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to add anything to all of this, or from your experience, and then we'll open it out to, maybe questions from the audience.
I think I'm just glad we had this conversation. It's also been kind of good to remember a lot of these things and touch into them again, particularly around safety and non-doing, and just accompanying and listening, and just the power of that, which I think is very, very underrated, because we, in our masters in schools and university, we don't have experiential spaces where we get to understand what actually unfolds when someone listens to us deeply with presence. And I think coming into the presence course was the first time that I saw it happen, and I understood that apart from the theory, apart from the, all the theory and the logic and the education around psychotherapy, the felt experience of presence and listening really, really matters, and is fundamental, I think, in shifting my work. So just thank you for the conversation today. And as always, thank you for, bringing presence-oriented psychotherapy into the world. And maybe we can open it up to questions.
And thank you, Arpita. I mean, I've always found the questions very incisive, and it's like coming from also this kind of like, because for each of us, it's also this exploration. And it's not like even the presence oriented work, yes, it can be used as an approach, but it can also be used in conjunction with, other approaches because it's an orientation. It's from where and how we are looking at things. So other things can also kind of very easily kind of like come in whatever expertise one is already has, like you or trained in, and that can so easily kind of blend into things. And just before we open up to questions, if those here, we are starting the presence course. It starts every year in August. And maybe we can share the link and all the details, and you can have a look at it. And yeah, you're very welcome to write to us or ask questions about it. But with today's conversation and today's exploration, I'm wondering if there are any questions, and we'd be happy to kind of look at that and just explore together. And maybe we can take out the spotlight now. We can see everyone. Yeah. Yeah, Nivita.
Yeah, hi Sandy and Arpita. Thank you so much for this talk. I had a question around somatic practices. I was just curious, since Sandy also mentioned in the beginning, like there is a body aspect to presence oriented psychotherapy. I am curious what both of your perspectives are on the role of somatic practices, maybe things like expressive arts therapy, movement, drama. What would you both see as the role of those kinds of practices, or how can they play in to what both of you do?
Yeah, I think, when it is when it is a little challenging to be with things in the body, to be in this direct experience, um, then it makes sense to kind of externalize it a bit, to see it. We use many elements from focusing, and I think I've said this many times, like Eugene Gendlin, who was a developer of focusing, says that you can't smell the soup if your head is in it. So if we have to really know our experience, sense our experience, we must be present to it. And if we can't be present in the body, then there can be other ways, like, for example, through art, externalizing it and seeing it there and developing a relationship like this, and then bringing it slowly into the body. Because of our trauma is stored in the body, these patterns are stored in the body. The body plays a very vital role, not just because it stores trauma, because it also informs us in a very meaningful way of what is it that we are experiencing, and it can get us in touch with an inner wisdom as well. So, but when we encounter these patterns and these contractions come up, we spoke a lot about maybe touch, but movement is another way in which we can kind of, support the physiology. So, so even in presence-oriented work, we do bring in like externalization. We do bring in self-touch, movement when we are doing the somatic elements, bringing in the somatic elements, and that's also informed by a lot of the some trainings that I've done in somatic work, and 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 also of allowing the emotion in the body and giving space for the emotion in the body. Not just talking about the emotion, but really feeling that in the body. And to support the physiology, then there is the movement, the touch, or just coming into an awareness of it. Yeah, I don't know whether Arpita, you want to say anything more around this?
Just to add, and if you are an expressive arts therapist, you will kind of know this already. But I think the other thing that bringing arts and movement into the space provides us with is a lot of resourcing and a lot of anchoring. And we get to play. We're in this liminal space where we can play and explore. And art particularly, I think, has a great potential for metaphor. And it helps us access metaphor in a different way. And I do think like all of these things are quite important in however we are trying to, make contact with the client. So I think like Sandy said, it is much more of an orientation towards your psychic and your somatic and emotional experience. And you can use different things, but the orientation is the same.
Yeah, hi Avantika. Do you want to add anything here? Avantika is also
Hi.
an expressive arts therapist. Yeah, also done the course. Yeah.
Yes, I I just wanted to say thank you. This was such a enriching conversation. It also felt like just by talking about this, it was like tapping back into that space of presence. Um, and yeah, I'm really grateful. I'm glad I joined. I think one thought or question that was coming to me um, was around burnout and compassion fatigue that we often experience as therapists, especially when if we've been working for many years now, and even in early years, I think it comes up. So with this orientation, um, have you found that there to be a shift in that, or even in the framing of that itself in the therapist? How can we perhaps look at it differently from just this conventional idea of, oh my god, this is too much, I'm full, I'm out of capacity, or I need to just get away for a while to come back to myself or to have more space. Um, because it's like reading multiple books at the same time, right? There's so many stories that we are listening to and um, taking from, and you cannot not be changed by those and transformed by both those, and the exchange that happens, and so much learning happens. So yeah, just curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Avantika, for that question. One of, some, a lot of exciting things to talk about and explore. This whole thing of compassion fatigue. Like, really, what is that? Or burnout, right? Why does that happen? And sometimes, I'm not saying the only reason, but sometimes, we maybe, one is the doing that we feel like we have to hold space, we have to rescue, we are the only ones, we got to kind of like do this. And so there is a lot of the doing energy that is there. And then the second thing is that I'm not so much in touch with myself on a daily basis, perhaps, right? So I don't read the cues that my body is giving or that are there, that's saying, oh, slow down, or something is happening that needs attention, something I need to turn to it, or I'm carrying something from the client session with me, and it's not all gone. I was affected and impacted by this, and I don't know. Now, one in a presence orientation where mindfulness practice, like we insist on it. I don't know whether people do it, but it's like an everyday kind of like practice, right? It's practicing a certain way of being in the world, being with oneself. And that's a lot of also coming into this relationship with body, right? So we are in touch with what is it that is going on. You're able also to pick up on, like I said, the triggers are very important. And you're able to sense that, oh, something is happening now. And then responding to that. I'm not saying that, oh, then everything is okay. And, you can kind of like do 10 client sessions a day or something like that and be totally fine. But you get the cues that, oh, now slow down. Now maybe you need some rest. Maybe something else needs attending to that also needs space, right? And you respond to that. And hopefully the self-critical part, or the other beliefs that we have, that is also a little quieter, and so we come into a um, more relaxed space, a more relaxed attention also with our clients, right? Where everything can be held, right? And sometimes because of the presence orientation, sometimes I feel like, I can say that from my own experience as well. Sometimes I felt like also having a physical, like you're physically feeling uneasy, you've got a cold or something like that. And I've often felt that, oh, I really cannot show up for this session. It feels a lot. And then I'm there, right? And because then I am present, very present, and in presence, somehow that sense of presence can hold even this uneasiness and this whole sense. So when you're in presence, it really gives you that capacity and that holding space for all parts to really be there, and an ability to come back to your own sense of ground, right? So I think it really helps then, and I don't see it as that you really suffer then from so much of compassion fatigue. Um, and yes, if you don't respond to the signs and what your body mind is telling you, then of course it will show up in a way like the knocks will get even more and harder. And it's just life telling you that, you need to take a different turn. So nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I find that it feels more integrated into life, the work as well. It doesn't feel as separate uh, when it's when there is the flow of presence that you're in touch with. And I think from what you're sharing, it's also a little bit like ultimately because we are so present, there is a certain attention and energy that it's taking. So it's not like that's necessarily a tiring kind of energy, but it's effort. It's effort nonetheless. And so the capacity for that, one has to assess as to like what feels right in terms of number of sessions in a day and
Yes.
such.
Yeah. And our capacity also keeps changing, no? We are not superhuman beings. There are things going on in our lives as well. And so it is also fluid, just like all of life, So it's not like this fixed thing. So we may from time to time need to kind of modify things, and see how best we can be there for ourselves and our clients, right? Yeah. Arpita, anything more on that, or from anyone else? Actually, it can just be just a conversation.
Oh,
I
I
don't know how
think.
to raise hand, but I just, hello, first of all, hello, Sandy ma'am. This is Manaza this side. So I have recently, I also reached out to you through a message, and we recently had a word. I think this is just a little bit of sharing experience. I recently completed my MPhil in clinical psychology. Have had a lot of experience throughout the course with borderline personality, and that's why I actually had reached out to you also, because I always felt this lag when it had come to relational trauma, or people saying that I'm so distressed that I don't know what to do, irrespective of whatever therapeutic approach you apply with them. I think the closest that they benefited with was DBT, but still, I always felt that there was this lack that, those patients could not feel to the fullest. And when I was just hearing you both, like Arpita ma'am and you, I was so much relating. I just before this session, just before this workshop, a patient had come here and she had similar borderline features, and she was exactly saying the same, that I cannot relate with anyone. I cannot talk to anyone. I don't know when was the last time I was open to someone. It's been 3 years, it's been 4 years, like even to the smallest of achievements she mentioned. And I was just like, something like just being for the patient is required. And we've not been taught this in any of the curriculums. And it kind of upsets me. So, because this is the lack when, when you cannot relate with such patients, it's just with experience that I've learned it, not through the supervisors or not through the teachers. I think the closest I had an idea about this was when in St. Mira's you had come to teach us about, basic soft skills, and Jaya ma'am had kind of pushed us towards this approach. But otherwise, all the institutes have been to, they kind of have not, touched upon this approach. So I really feel that sometimes it gets difficult to connect with the patients. And it's been me who's experientially feeling this, but my other counterparts, they are simply practicing whatever has been theoretically taught. And that is kind of not benefiting the patient. Then they experience that therapy does not work, or it's just of no use, comes up. So, I mean, I think, this has to be voiced out that even with the highest level of course that we've done under our field is not giving us that exposure towards therapeutic understanding, then it's very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, someone, with whom I was having a conversation about this, it is faculty, and she heard about the course, and she was saying that, yeah, I think maybe in the course you're teaching, how to be a therapist, right? And the process of therapy, right? And I think that is true. We are not taught what is the process, right? And to learn the process, we have to be in it, and it has to be done with our whole selves. So not just the intellectual understanding. And when you're with clients, then you really come in touch with everything that can show up within you as well, right? So yes, very much. So we'd also really like to bring it into other spaces, other, many other, in fact, some of the people who've done the courses also are in teaching and, in universities, and they're bringing in these elements into the curriculum as well. And there's more of that we'd like to bring in also. Of course, St. Mira's is very rooted in that. So they are also our academic partner in both our courses, both the Presence and the 1-year mindfulness listening course. Yeah, Soumya, you had a question and you've been waiting long. So let's take that, which is really interesting around social justice, right?
Yeah. Hi, Sandy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'll just read out what I wrote in the chat as well. I'm really enjoying being here, and I feel like what you shared about just showing up without an agenda and kind of not getting caught into some kind of like savior mindset of, oh, I'm going to save the client or transform their life, but just like actually being with them instead of doing things. I think that really spoke to me. I'm wondering where does this course and this as a modality, presence-oriented psychotherapy as a modality, and this program as well, and basically all the training programs that you're offering for professionals, I would say, where do they land on social justice and anti-oppression in the Indian context, and do you integrate them into your programs? Yes, no, just like more more clarity and info about it, and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of these elements where we've started to put it in the 1-year mindfulness-based counseling course, listening with embodied presence, because a lot of those spaces also want to be held by people who also work with communities and with people. The way I would see this is, like I said, being with what arises in us is the fundamental piece. Like that's the piece we start to work with. Now, when you're talking about social justice issues, of how how are we in relation to it? What is the impact of that in how we are carrying it within ourselves, right? And so we encounter those pieces within ourselves. And so we kind of, as we are encountering it, like all of life, there is that, right? In all our life experiences, we are encountering it. And for someone who is kind of really with those pieces, in those pieces, in their everyday life, in everyday situation, or that have taken it up for themselves, when they bring that in and bring that inner sensing into it of how does this, what is it that gets evoked over here, and can I be with it in that way? And as you're being with it, many layers start to unfold. You know, we are still also exploring how these pieces can come in a presence-oriented work. But I know many of the people who've done these courses also work in these areas, and they bring that in for themselves. The thing is, when we soften something within us, we are able to approach what is happening in the world and how we are affected by it and how it's affecting other people. We are able to approach it with a little more spaciousness and with much more clarity and compassion and wisdom. And I think that's where the approach helps. So we don't, as of now, directly bring in these pieces, but as and when they arise. If something is really important to a person, then that naturally kind of like comes in. Yeah, but it is an interesting intersection. I don't know if whether anyone else wants to add anything to this. Arpita, if there's somewhere, somehow you see this, or anyone from the audience as well.
Sandy, may I?
Yes, Lata, yes.
May I just contribute in some way related to the question that Soumya asked? I do engage in peace circles, which is groups, larger groups. And I've noticed that, say, even when we ask a question, what is peace? We firstly, we are two facilitators. We write down what we think is peace, and we kind of share it. So we are at the same kind of space. And secondly, when the basic question is what is peace, we find so many different answers. For example, in one community in the Northeast, peace is a very bad word, because they say when the government says peace and people come in, we know there's something going to happen. So they just shun the word peace. I'm just giving you one example. So the importance of starting from where people think of a particular topic, whether it's conflict, whether it's about the other community, I think once one starts that and uses then the process of seeing where you are in it, because I also remember a situation where there was a certain conflict between two people, and the facilitator and I, we really got stuck, and we said, okay, maybe we'll take time to sort it out and all that. Later, I realized we were in the doing mode. The best thing to do was to give it to the group and say, well, we have this question, we have 2 points of view, let's look at it. At that point, as a facilitator, I got stuck. So it can be used very well with groups. I don't know about large communities, but when we work in communities and any issue, we can start from where we are first and then see where the group is. Yeah, just a very short example.
Yeah, thank you, Lata, for that, because Lata has also done the course, and she also works a lot with in these areas. So thank you for that. Yeah, it's really encountering. Yeah, the same things apply. The doing energy, the without working with an agenda, whether one is working with individuals or groups. We have now included in the presence course, not just individual work, but also group work of how does presence-oriented work look like therapeutically in groups. Because we would like more spaces like that to come into the world, more people to also benefit from the work. And the more practitioners we have, the more the work gets carried forward. Yeah.
Thanks, Sandy. Thank you, Lata. Thank you both.
So, yeah, I think we are also at the end of our time, together. And really, it was a very joyful morning for me. And thank you, Arpita, for kind of joining in, and the team at Just Being, Shivi, Gayatri, and all the others. And everyone else who's come in. We had an enormous amount of interest in this topic, and maybe we can do something more on this. Some like over 180 registrations for this. So those of who could not join, they will get a recording of it, and yeah. And hopefully we'll have more of these kind of web series and engagements, and talking about various things that excite us and are very central to the presence-oriented work. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandy.
Arpita, would you want to add anything?
Yes, I was just saying thank you. And
Yeah.
it's lovely having this conversation. And I already have a couple of ideas for the next. So yeah, I think between me and Avantika, there are a couple of things that we would love to get you to talk about.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you all very much.